The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from dust and desperation, the kind that settles deep in your lungs and steals the light from your eyes. It was a day like any other in Redemption Gulch, a town carved out of the unforgiving earth, where fortunes were made and lost quicker than a gambler's sigh. But today a different kind of currency was being traded, a currency far more precious, far more vulnerable. Today a father was selling his daughter. The town square, usually bustling with the clatter of horseshoes and the raucous laughter of men, was eerily silent. A knot of onlookers had gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and a profound, unspoken shame. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, baking the wooden planks of the makeshift auction block where the girl stood, her silhouette a fragile outline against the harsh glare. She was no more than 16 summers old, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored the vast empty expanse of the desert surrounding them. Her name was Sarah, and in that moment she was reduced to nothing more than a piece of property, a commodity to be bartered and sold to the highest bidder. Her father, a man whose face was etched with the hard lines of relentless hardship and a chilling indifference, stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the potential buyers. He was a man driven by a desperation that had twisted his heart and warped his sense of right and wrong. The whispers of the crowd were like a swarm of angry bees buzzing around her, each word a sting. They spoke of debts unpaid, of a failing farm, of a father's desperate attempt to cling to the vestiges of his livelihood. But beneath the surface of their gossip, a deeper, more unsettling truth simmered, the brutal reality of a world where a woman's worth was often measured by her potential, not by her personhood. Sheriff Brody, a man weathered by years of enforcing the law in this lawless land, stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed. He'd seen his share of hardship, of injustice, of the dark underbelly of humanity. But this was different. This was a violation of the very essence of decency, a wound to the soul of the community. He watched the scene unfold, the father's cold calculations, the girl's silent plea, the slow agonizing unraveling of her innocence. He knew he had a choice to make, a line to draw in the sand. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut that crossing that line would change everything. The question was, would he? And at what cost? The father, his face a mask of cold resolve, began the grim proceedings. His voice, raspy from years of hard living and cheap whiskey, cut through the strained silence like a rusty saw. "She's strong," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the assembled men. "Can work a field, cook a meal and keep a house. Worth more than any nag you'll find around these parts." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. The blatant objectification was palpable, yet the unspoken truth of the harsh realities of the West hung in the air, a suffocating weight. He rattled off her supposed virtues, each word a further stripping of her dignity. He spoke of her youth, a quality to be exploited, not cherished. He mentioned her obedience, a characteristic valued above her spirit. All the while Sarah stood, a trembling statue of silent despair, her eyes locked on the dusty ground as if trying to disappear into the very earth that had betrayed her. A grizzled rancher, his face tanned and weathered like old leather, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground, his eyes narrowed in appraisal. "How much?" he barked, his voice a gravelly echo of the harsh landscape. The father named a sum, a pittance in the grand scheme of things, but a king's ransom to a man facing ruin. The auction began, a sickening dance of greed and desperation. Bids were offered, raised and met with stony silence. The men, their faces impassive, their eyes calculating, saw her not as a person, but as a means to an end, a solution to their loneliness, a source of labor. Sarah's silent suffering was almost unbearable. Her lips moved, forming silent pleas, but no sound escaped. Her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, trembled with a fear that threatened to consume her entirely. The silence was punctuated only by the rasping of her father's voice and the rustling of the wind, which seemed to carry away her hopes with every gust. Sheriff Brody, watching from the edge of the square, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen violence, he'd seen death, he'd seen the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men. But this was a different kind of evil, a slow, deliberate corrosion of the human spirit. He felt the weight of his badge, the responsibility of his office, pressing down on him. Furthermore, the faces of the townspeople were a tapestry of conflicting emotions. Some were curious, others embarrassed, a few outright gleeful. But the prevailing sentiment was one of resignation, a grim acceptance of the way things were. Now, consider how this applies when you face a situation that feels morally wrong. Often we tell ourselves it's not our place to interfere. But the true measure of a person is in their willingness to stand up, even when the odds are stacked against them. As the bidding war intensified, a palpable tension began to grip the square. The air crackled with a sense of impending doom, a premonition of the life Sarah was about to lose. The men, their faces flushed with a mix of avarice and anticipation, continued to raise their offers, each increment a further nail in the coffin of her freedom. The father, his eyes gleaming with a desperate triumph, watched the proceedings with a disturbing detachment. He saw only salvation, not the utter devastation he was inflicting. Furthermore, a chilling realization settled over the crowd. This transaction was not merely about a young woman's fate. It was a stark illustration of the power dynamics at play in this unforgiving land. It exposed the vulnerability of those without resources, without protection, without a voice. It was a testament to the insidious nature of exploitation, the way it could seep into the very fabric of society, corrupting even the most basic human values. Building on this, however, the sheriff's internal conflict reached a critical juncture. He was a man of the law, bound by duty to uphold order and justice. But he was also a human being, capable of empathy, of recognizing the inherent wrongness of what he was witnessing. The weight of his badge, the oath he had sworn, pressed down on him, yet it was his conscience that truly struggled. Another crucial layer is the intricate web of societal expectations and pressures. The men present, they were not inherently evil. They were products of their environment, shaped by the harsh realities of the West. Many were lonely, struggling to survive, and saw Sarah as a potential solution to their problems. But their actions, however understandable in the context of their lives, did not make them right. Consequently, the sheriff grappled with the potential consequences of his intervention. He knew that stepping in would challenge the established order, could potentially ignite a confrontation. He could face the wrath of the father, the disapproval of the community, even legal repercussions. The risks were significant, the potential for violence very real. Conversely, the alternative was to stand by and watch as a young woman's life was irrevocably altered, to allow the injustice to unfold, to become complicit in her suffering. He weighed the cost of his silence against the potential for action, the weight of his principles against the harsh realities of the world. The longer he hesitated, the more the scales tipped towards a decision that would forever define him. Now consider how this applies when you face a difficult decision. The easy path is often the one that leads to regret. The tension in the square reached a fever pitch, a palpable pressure that seemed to squeeze the very air from the onlookers' lungs. The bids had soared, each offer a fresh insult to Sarah's dignity, a further erosion of her hope. The father, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, was about to accept the highest price when a sound cut through the din, a sound that silenced the auctioneer and hushed the crowd. It was the sheriff's voice, steady and resolute, yet carrying a weight of authority that brooked no argument. "Hold it right there," he commanded, his words echoing across the square, each syllable a hammer blow against the prevailing injustice. His voice was not raised in anger, but in a controlled, deliberate assertion of the law. Furthermore, the timing of his intervention was critical. He had waited, assessing the situation, gauging the reactions of the crowd, and allowing the full weight of the offense to be exposed before he acted. This was not a rash decision, but a carefully considered move designed to maximize its impact. Building on this, however, the sheriff's entrance into the fray was not a simple declaration of authority. It was a carefully choreographed act of defiance, a theatrical moment that underscored the moral stakes of the situation. He pushed his way through the crowd, his badge gleaming in the harsh sunlight, his gaze fixed on the father, who now stood frozen, his face a mixture of surprise and defiance. Consequently, the confrontation that followed was a study in contrasts. The sheriff, the embodiment of law and order, standing against the father, the personification of desperation and greed. The air crackled with unspoken threats, with the potential for violence that simmered beneath the surface. The crowd held its breath, anticipating the inevitable clash. Conversely, the sheriff's actions were not driven solely by a sense of duty. He was, after all, a man of flesh and blood, capable of feeling empathy and compassion. He looked at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and nascent hope. He saw not just a victim, but a human being, a young woman whose life was about to be shattered. Another crucial layer is the role the crowd played, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. They were not simply spectators, they were participants, their silence a form of complicity. The sheriff's act of defiance forced them to confront their own roles in the injustice, to question their own values. Their reactions, a mixture of shock, support, and outrage, were a testament to the power of individual action to challenge the status quo. Now consider how this applies when you face a difficult decision or are present when you witness injustice. It is in these moments that we are truly tested, and our character is revealed. Sheriff Brody's declaration hung in the air, a challenge to the established order, a ripple of defiance that disrupted the grim proceedings. The father, momentarily stunned, sputtered a protest, his face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. "You got no say in this, Sheriff! This is my business!" he roared, his voice cracking with a desperate, defiant edge. Furthermore, the sheriff, though resolute, understood he was walking a tightrope. He was not just confronting a desperate man, he was challenging a system, a societal norm that condoned, even encouraged, the exploitation of the vulnerable. He knew the potential for violence was high, the consequences of his actions unpredictable. He had to tread carefully, choosing his words with precision, ensuring his authority remained absolute. Building on this, the sheriff's response was calculated, measured, and delivered with a quiet authority that commanded respect. "I do have a say," he countered, his voice firm but devoid of theatrics. "This ain't livestock you're selling. This is a human being, and under my watch she's protected." He paused, letting the words sink in, the weight of his pronouncement settling over the crowd. Consequently, the sheriff didn't immediately resort to force. He knew that a show of strength could easily escalate the situation, turning a moral dispute into a violent confrontation. Instead, he employed the law, subtly but firmly. He reminded the father of the laws against human trafficking, of the potential penalties that awaited him. He spoke of the importance of human dignity, of the inherent rights of every individual. Conversely, the crowd, which had initially been a collection of silent observers, began to stir. Some, emboldened by the sheriff's intervention, voiced their support, their whispers of encouragement growing into a chorus of muted approval. Others, however, remained wary, their faces etched with a fear of disrupting the established order, of challenging the status quo. Another crucial layer is the psychological impact on Sarah. The sheriff's intervention was not just a legal act, it was a moment of profound emotional transformation. Her eyes, which had previously been clouded with despair, now flickered with a glimmer of hope. Her trembling subsided, replaced by a nascent sense of relief, a tentative belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she might be saved. Now consider how this applies when you witness injustice, or when you are faced with a moral dilemma. It is not enough to simply condemn the wrongdoer, you must also consider the impact of your actions on the victims. The sheriff's intervention, a solitary act of defiance, had a ripple effect that spread through the assembled crowd, transforming the atmosphere from one of hushed anticipation to one of cautious optimism. The auction, once a grim ritual of degradation, was now a scene of simmering uncertainty. The father, his face a mask of barely contained fury, seemed momentarily paralyzed by the sheriff's audacity. Furthermore, the sheriff's actions weren't merely about enforcing the law, they were about instilling a sense of moral responsibility within the community. He understood that true justice wasn't just the application of rules, but the cultivation of empathy and the recognition of shared humanity. He was, in essence, planting a seed of conscience in the barren landscape of Redemption Gulch, hoping it would take root and blossom into a culture of respect and decency. Consequently, the immediate aftermath of his intervention was a period of tense negotiation. The sheriff, drawing upon his years of experience, calmly and persuasively explained the legal ramifications of the father's actions. He outlined the consequences: fines, imprisonment, the lasting stain on one's reputation, all of which served to undermine the father's resolve. The sheriff, a shrewd negotiator, utilized the law like a scalpel, carefully dissecting the father's arguments, exposing the flaws in his rationale, and forcing him to confront the moral implications of his deeds. Conversely, the sheriff's strategy wasn't solely reliant on legal maneuvering. He appealed to the father's sense of reason, attempting to reach the humanity that lay buried beneath years of hardship and desperation. He spoke of the value of family, of the importance of protecting one's own, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. He offered assistance, suggesting ways for the father to overcome his financial burdens without resorting to such desperate measures. Another crucial layer is the impact on the townspeople who were present. The sheriff's courage, a beacon in the gathering darkness, had ignited a spark of hope within them. Some, initially hesitant, now found their voices expressing their support for his actions. Others, moved by the sheriff's righteousness, began to question their own complicity in the injustice, realizing that their silence had served to perpetuate the cycle of exploitation. Now consider how this applies when you witness acts of injustice or inequality. It is not enough to simply be a bystander. You must actively choose a side. The story of Redemption Gulch, of Sarah and the sheriff, is more than just a tale of a single act of defiance. It's a lens through which we can examine the very essence of human nature, the interplay of power, desperation, and the enduring quest for justice. It presents a stark portrait of a society grappling with its own moral compass. A society where the boundaries between right and wrong were often blurred by the harsh realities of survival. Drawing these threads together, we observe how a single moment of courage can shatter the illusion of inevitability. The sheriff's intervention became a catalyst, a stone dropped into a still pond, creating ripples that spread outwards, disrupting the established order. The auction, once a grim transaction, transformed into a crucible, testing the moral fiber of everyone present. It was a microcosm of the larger world, a place where the forces of exploitation and compassion collided, and where the fate of one person became a mirror reflecting the values of many. In light of these insights, the narrative encourages us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our own capacity for both good and evil. We see the father's desperation, the townspeople's complicity, and the sheriff's unwavering commitment. This story challenges us to recognize the complexities of human behavior, to understand that even in the darkest of times, the potential for redemption remains. The narrative underscores the idea that within each of us lies the power to make a difference, to stand up against injustice, no matter how daunting the odds. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider that the true cost of silence is far greater than the potential risks of speaking out. This is not merely a historical anecdote, it's a timeless parable, a map for navigating the moral landscapes that we encounter in our own lives. It is a reminder that the choices we make, both big and small, shape the world around us. The story of Sarah and the sheriff, like a finely crafted mirror, reflects back to us the complexities of our shared humanity. Reflecting on this journey so far, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of a broader understanding, a deeper appreciation for the enduring power of the human spirit. The events in Redemption Gulch, however tragic, offer a potent reminder that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, hope can be found and that justice, though often delayed, is never truly defeated. The final act promises to distill these complex ideas into a message that resonates far beyond the dusty streets of that forgotten town. The dust of Redemption Gulch eventually settled, but the echoes of that day, the day the sheriff stepped in, resonated far beyond the confines of the town square. Sarah, rescued from a fate that would have extinguished her spirit, was given a second chance. The father, though humbled and burdened by shame, was spared the full weight of the law, granted a chance to rebuild his life, to reckon with the choices that had led him to the brink. The town, forever marked by the events, was left to contemplate its own complicity and to redefine the boundaries of its moral compass. Furthermore, the story, however specific to its time and place, transcends the limitations of the American West. It speaks to the universal struggle against injustice, the enduring battle between good and evil that plays out in every society, in every era. It reminds us that the fight for human dignity is a constant undertaking, a responsibility that falls upon each of us, regardless of our circumstances. The sheriff's act of courage, born from a deep-seated sense of right and wrong, became a testament to the transformative power of individual action. Building on this, the narrative serves as a potent reminder that history is not simply a collection of dates and events. It is a tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, a story of triumphs and failures, of resilience and despair. It is a mirror reflecting our own values, our own flaws, and our own potential for greatness. The events in Redemption Gulch, viewed through this lens, become a cautionary tale, a call to arms, and an enduring source of inspiration. Consequently, the true legacy of that day lies not just in the rescue of Sarah, but in the indelible mark it left on the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. The sheriff's actions, a bold testament to the power of standing up for what is right, sparked a transformation. It was a reminder that true strength lies not in brute force or unwavering obedience, but in the courage to challenge the status quo, to champion the vulnerable, and to uphold the principles of justice. The true practice begins now in the quiet moments of our own lives, in the choices we make every day. It is in these moments that we decide whether we will be silent witnesses or active participants, whether we will allow injustice to flourish, or whether we will stand up and speak out. The story of Sarah and the sheriff is not just a tale of the past. It is a challenge to the present, a call to action for the future. It is an invitation to embrace our own capacity for courage, to embody the principles of justice, and to create a world where the vulnerable are protected and where the spirit of humanity can thrive. Let the echo of the sheriff's resolve reverberate within us, guiding our actions, inspiring our choices, and reminding us that even in the darkest of times, hope, like a resilient flower, can always find a way to bloom.